All right, what's going on, everyone? So today we're going to take a look at some updates around the ongoing war in Gaza. There's an airstrike targeting the senior-most Hamas commander over the weekend. We'll talk about what we know so far there. UNRWA, or UNRWA, is back in the news, not in a good way. A couple airstrikes and targeted raids across Gaza. And then the U.S. says they're going to be winding down pier operations. You remember the floating pier attached not all that long ago. And the Financial Times went into this, didn't pull any punches, calling this project a colossal failure. So we'll be sure to dive into that. Now, starting with the targeting of a senior Hamas leader, Muhammed Deif. Deif is the senior-most Hamas military commander in Gaza. He runs the Qassam brigades, which is the militant arm of Hamas. His death, if it was confirmed, would be the most significant since October 7th in terms of targeting Hamas leadership. Now, Saturday morning around 10:30 local time in Israel, Israeli warplanes conducted an attack in Khan Yunis. Now, right away, they said they were targeting Muhammed Deif as well as Rafa Salameh, a close associate of Deif, and the commander of the Hamas Khan Yunis battalions. Israel noted in their initial announcements that this strike did take place in a humanitarian safe zone where Palestinian civilians were told to relocate to as the IDF operated throughout other portions of the Strip, but also said that these were targeted strikes and the Hamas facility was not amongst the tents that were set up for the displaced Palestinians in the area. We do have some before and after pictures of the strike, and it was a significant ordinance that they dropped here, which kind of suggests that Deif might have been underground, maybe not just sitting out in the open as you might expect. Now, Al Jazeera and the Gaza Ministry of Health put out reports saying that 90 Palestinians were killed in this strike, along with as many as 300 injured, and Hamas is referring to this as a massacre. They've not put out the names of all of those that were killed. There have been 35 names so far released. Included in that list is the Hamas Minister of the Economy, but no Muhammed Deif, no Rafa Salameh, which is in line with what we've seen from Hamas from the start of this war, and this is something we'll get into here in a moment. But Hamas never releases when their senior leaders are killed. Even their lower-level commanders, the names aren't put out. You do see this with Hezbollah and other militant groups throughout the Middle East during this conflict. Hezbollah, pretty quickly, like within 24 hours, announces the death and in a sense, celebrates the death, praises the service of some of their commanders killed by Israel up north. Hamas doesn't do that at all. I think there's been maybe one occasion since this war began where Hamas even recognized publicly at all that someone in their organization was killed. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, from the moment this attack was carried out, senior Hamas officials kind of across the board and Hamas-affiliated media denied that he was even there at all. In fact, Hamas has been referring to this as a massacre designed to just target civilians. It's a complete lie that anyone from Hamas was there at baseline. Now, in reading between the lines here a little bit, there were a lot of statements coming out saying that Deif was not there and Deif was not targeted. There was not really any pushing back on Rafa Salameh, the commander of the Khan Yunis brigade. You got to read between those lines a little bit there. That might be recognition that Salameh was killed. Possibly. Again, there's not a lot of information to go off of here. In fact, in recent days since this strike, the IDF has come out and said that they're able to confirm that Salameh was killed. We don't have any of that information publicly available, right? Was it intercepted communications, some sort of imagery overhead, a source on the ground? I don't know. But the IDF has come out and said that Salameh was killed, and that actually kind of lines up with these Hamas leaders not denying it right out the gate. But we still don't have anything more about Deif. And there's a couple different ways to look at this. One, the immediate denial of Hamas leadership, both within Gaza and abroad. Was it immediately denied because they knew him to be elsewhere, right? As an example, let's say that Deif has exited Gaza and is somewhere outside of the Gaza Strip at this point. If that were the case and Hamas leadership knew that, and I'm kind of taking this to the extreme to prove a point, then the minute that Israel says they're targeting Deif, they can come out and say, no, you didn't. No chance. It's possible that is one of the scenarios, or that he's in another portion of the Gaza Strip entirely, and they just know for a fact that a targeted strike in Khan Yunis is not going to get him. So there's that aspect of it. The other is that they know that that's an area that he was operating in, so any targeted strike in and around his headquarters, or the area that he was known to be hanging out in recently, they're going to come out right out the gate and deny it because they don't want any confirmation that he was successfully targeted. So I think you can kind of look at this from multiple directions to get an idea of why they would have come out right away denying everything start to finish. Now, something else to keep in mind here when looking at other conflicts in recent years, Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban, was dead for 2 years before the Taliban said anything about it. And then the leader of Al-Qaeda, the second leader of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who by all accounts was killed by a U.S. drone strike in Kabul in 2022, they still have not announced formally his death. In fact, shortly after his death, they put out an audio statement kind of pretending like it was him after the strike, but there was no date and all that stuff. So these organizations, they don't want to just come right out the gate and confirm that their leaders were killed for a variety of reasons. And there's a couple different reasons for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and it would be different for Hamas. But again, it's a pattern, right? We have to keep that in mind. And when looking at all of this idea of cutting the head off the snake, it's one strategy. It's one tactic of a larger strategy. So the death of Deif, if that were to have just taken place in Khan Yunis, it's not going to end the war. Surprise, I don't think anybody was holding out hope for that. We, the United States, and our allies have killed 2 al-Qaeda leaders and as many as 5 Islamic State leaders in the past few years, depending on when you decide that organization officially began. But those 2 groups still exist, right? And that's one of the challenges with fighting these dispersed kind of terrorist networks. Right? It's going to do something. Cutting the head off the snake helps. It might sow confusion within the organization. It's always hard to tell exactly how much power that person at the top has, or in this case, Deif, the top of the military arm of Hamas. It's a good thing. If you have the opportunity to eliminate leadership, you take that in the middle of war, certainly, but it's not going to end it. It's hard to tell who the successor would be that would step up into his role. And with a dispersed organization like this, it's unlikely that Deif, in this case specifically, was issuing day-to-day orders to fighters all across the Gaza Strip. It's just much more of a dispersed organization. But either way, if it does happen, it's the most notable targeting and death of a Hamas member since the October 7th attacks. Now shifting over to UNRWA, or UNRWA. They're back in the news, as I mentioned before, not in a good way here. So there's a couple of different stories that came out in the last few days that were notable just because they're kind of, we're getting a lot about UNRWA. You don't hear this about mosques or school or other schools, things like that. UNRWA seems to continue to be kind of a focus of these Israeli press releases when they come out, kind of highlighting how tied in UNRWA is to the ongoing war in a way. I want to caveat that here. So couple days ago, they put out some information. We'll play the clips here saying that IDF forces conducted a targeted raid on a Hamas combat complex that was embedded inside of a compound previously used by UNRWA. And that's important. So it looks like it was a UNRWA compound. It does not sound like, as Israel is putting this information out, that it was a currently operating UNRWA compound. We have seen that in the past. There was a video early in the war where there were major computer networks set up underneath a UNRWA facility, siphoning off the power from that building above ground, where it was very hard to believe that they didn't know there was something, directly underground chewing through that much of their electrical bill. This isn't the case. This looks like the building was not being used by UNRWA anymore, but it does raise the question of why did Hamas choose that? And maybe it's because they think Israel won't target a UNRWA facility, or if they do, they're going to come under more scrutiny. And that's actually kind of how this one played out here. So they say during the raid, IDF troops engaged in close quarters combat with terrorist cells that had fortified themselves inside the UNRWA compound, and they located parts, and we'll play some of the clips here, for assembling UAVs, or drones. They call a war room for surveillance operations and large quantities of weapons, including tactical drones, rockets, machine guns, mortars, explosives, and grenades. The war room, think about it, kind of a small command and control center, computers, maybe some maps, phones, things like that. Whatever you think of with a command and control room, dial that down by a lot. And that's something that's still used by groups like Hamas to be able to control the fight and understand where their elements are. But it's not going to look anything like, in the early days of the war, actually, Israel put out some graphics, some animated graphics showing what the war room might look like under the Shifa hospital. It didn't, right? It's not looking like that anywhere across the strip. It's much dialed down from those kind of grand expectations of a command and control center. They say next to the terror compound raided by the IDF, they exposed an underground tunnel that passed under the building and served as UNRWA's headquarters in the Gaza Strip, under the building that served as UNRWA headquarters. So another Hamas tunnel going underneath a UNRWA headquarters building here. And then they say next door to this UNRWA compound, there was an underground laboratory for the manufacturing of explosives and weapons inside of a university building. So we've seen a lot of kind of homemade weaponry coming from Hamas. We've seen rocket factories underground, and I understand factories, kind of a loose term, but you see the equipment needed to build these kind of rudimentary weapons that Hamas has been using since day one and before of this current iteration of the war, to include all the way down things like IEDs, right? If you're going to put together a rudimentary IED, improvised explosive device, you still need the materials to be able to put that together. It makes sense at times to kind of consolidate those and have a mini factory or assembly plant, if you will. IDF says that underneath this university building, or in this university building, they found more of those supplies. Then there was another UNRWA event in the news here where they said that just yesterday, actually, Israel struck a UNRWA school, the Abu Oraban school in Nusrat. Apologies for the pronunciation there. They said that the location, the school here, served as a hideout and operational infrastructure from which attacks against IDF troops operating in Gaza were directed and carried out. Israel added that prior to the strike, numerous steps were taken in order to mitigate the risk of harming civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. Hamas put out a statement to this end. I didn't see a Hamas statement around the raid on the UNRWA facility previously mentioned, but in this case, Hamas said, quote, "The criminal Zionist occupation army continues to escalate its massacres against defenseless civilians displaced in shelter centers. The latest being the barbaric bombing of UNRWA's Abu Araban school this afternoon in the Nusrat refugee camp, resulting in a death toll of about 15 martyrs and dozens of wounded. This is an extension of the ongoing war of extermination against our defenseless civilians and the targeting of women and children, which is a blatant Zionist challenge to the international community and a disregard for the United Nations demands that stress the necessity of stopping the aggression against our people." Now, there was an interesting Hamas statement they put out yesterday that I really haven't been able to verify with anything at all, but I wanted to bring it up here. They put out something on their Telegram channel, just text. No pictures, no videos, and it doesn't correspond with anything I've seen from Israel or any other news sources. But they said that they were able to spot a Zionist force that had infiltrated, hidden inside an aid truck, and when it arrived in Rafah, entered one of the houses, they were able to engage these Israeli forces, killing and wounding all of them. That's a very notable claim. I mean, that sounds like a raid, right? It sounds like maybe a hostage extraction of sorts. If there's an infantry force being transported to a certain portion of Rafah, they jump out, move into a house, and they're all killed and wounded immediately. Two things. I would expect Hamas to release some sort of picture or video of that. They have in the past. Even in close engagements with Israeli forces, we still see videos or the aftermath of attacks. We haven't seen that. Israel hasn't said anything about this event taking place, and there's a little part of me in the back of my mind that wonders if this is Hamas attacking a humanitarian truck. Maybe people on board trying to protect the supplies, or some sort of guards trying to get the aid from location A to B. I don't know. It was an interesting statement put out by Hamas. We haven't seen a lot like that in the past. It just felt like it was worth bringing up there. Then shifting over to the Gaza Pier, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters on Thursday that the U.S. will, quote, wind down pier operations. They say, according to U.S. sources, they say the pier enabled the United States to deliver nearly 20 million pounds of humanitarian aid into Gaza without having to put any U.S. troops on the ground. That's according to U.S. Central Command. Now, Financial Times put out a report that we're going to run through here, and they didn't pull any punches. This article was titled "How the U.S.'s $230 million Gaza Pier Became a Colossal Failure." I feel like I've seen $300 million at times. Either way, we'll go with expensive. Financial Times throughout this article sticks with $230 million, which is still a lot. So they say the pier was supposed to stave off famine in Gaza urgently, but in its 2 months of on and off operation, it delivered supplies equivalent to just a couple days' worth of the aid that flowed into the enclave before the war. They say what little aid was delivered, fewer than 600 trucks, according to Financial Times estimates, piled up on the shore and rotted in the summer sun. They say the reason for this was churned up roads, lawlessness, and the unpredictability of Israeli checkpoints within Gaza made delivery across the final few kilometers to Palestinians nearly impossible. And this is something we've heard harped on for a long time, is one of the major challenges is not just getting aid into Gaza, but getting aid, from inside of Gaza to the people that need it. It's still an active war zone across much of the Strip. And it's one of the things they're pointing to here as to why once that aid made it via the long route over the sea, through the pier, into Gaza, even then a lot of it wasn't able to reach its final destination. The Palestinian people, they're in need of this assistance. Now, they did interview a few people here that spoke out about the failures of the pier. Ty Nahari, the executive director of Gisha, an Israeli human rights group, said, quote, "The U.S. wanted to show that it was doing something to aid the humanitarian effort, and yet it wasn't successful in pushing Israel to do the most obvious necessary thing, which is to allow full access via the land crossing or allow access from Israeli and West Bank markets." Then Alexandra Say, the head of humanitarian policy and advocacy at Save the Children International, said, quote, "The pier was an expensive distraction from the actual problem. Israel is not allowing an unobstructed, unfettered assistance. Land routes are the most effective and safest way to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza." So really the major pushback that we've seen from day one of when this pier was announced was not that it would not bring aid in, and it's kind of the position I've taken on this, is it's something. It's going to, more aid is better than less aid when people are in need, right? So it's something. But a lot of the pushback has been, this is a lot. It's a major operation. It puts U.S. service members at risk trying to put this pier together out at sea and then maintain it. And then, of course, they're getting close to an active war zone where there's also other means of getting aid directly into Gaza, namely the overland crossings that the U.S. could have done more to pressure Israel to open up. That would not have required a pier being set up in the first place. But either way, at this point, it sounds like after just a couple months of existence, that pier is getting ready to come down. That's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our reader-funded publication, which is linked in the description below, called Between the Lines. We're putting out articles about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, transnational crime, all sorts of interesting subjects, I think, at least. Again, linked in the description below if you want to check that out. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.